All right, welcome back. So we're doing a little of the bit of the philosophical foundations of many of the political developments that'll be coming up. So I want to cover Descartes and Locke and Mary Wollstonecraft. They all, in their own ways, uh, ideas sort of fundamentally influenced the way uh, things moved forward. So Descartes, um, in what we would call epistemology or theory of knowledge. But the important thing about his theory of knowledge was that it was not based on religion. You'll recall that, all the way back to Agora in that film, right? So the Library of Alexandria, it was also a temple. Right? Scholars were also religious figures. And this was largely the norm um, up until the Enlightenment era. And Descartes is sort of identified as the first figure who says, look, let's go back to first principles and see what we can know independently of any uh, dogma, right? Any religious dogma or other sorts of assumptions that we have. So, in Descartes' Meditations 1 and 2, in the sections I gave you, this is where he sort of decides to tear down everything he knows, right? Doubt everything, and then build back up from a secure foundation. So we're in the early 1600s right now. And again, this is the beginning of the Enlightenment, right? In the Enlightenment, people begin to turn away from basing all their knowledge on religious dogma, in part thanks to Descartes. Um, Now, it's not that people had never done any independent thinking prior to the Enlightenment, right? So um, the Islamic empires had plenty of scholars, right? The Romans had plenty of scholars. Throughout the Middle Ages, the scholastics, who were sort of monks that theorized, and they were very smart and did some clever, important work, right? But it was sort of within the boundaries of religion. And to be honest, like even Descartes, within he avoided coming to conclusions that were like atheistic. Now, if we look at Hume, Hume was a much more who came after Descartes. He was a much more controversial figure, and he would argue against the existence of God. He would use it. He would do it as characters in a dialogue so that he could still have plausible deniability. But everyone pretty much knew that Hume was an atheist and he couldn't get a job for that reason. So um, even if the philosophy begins to become, not explicitly religious, it's still there's certain bounds that you can't cross. Right? You can't argue for atheism, but just in his methods, right? Descartes is implicitly saying, "I'm not relying on religion for all my knowledge anymore." So Descartes was an interesting uh, figure. So I mean, at the time, if you wanted to be a philosopher, you kind of needed to be a monk, right? But Descartes was not. He what he was independently wealthy. I don't think he was incredibly rich, but he did inherit some money. He also earned some money as a mercenary soldier fighting in the 30 Years' War, which was a war sort of between the Protestants and the Holy Roman Empire. That was a pretty very destructive war throughout Europe. Um, he was also a gambler, made some money gambling, so he did retire sort of young, right? And at that point, he decided to devote his life to philosophy. He was later employed as a tutor to some rich people, princes and princesses. Uh, he's kind of a funny guy. He liked to sleep late. He liked to sit around in bed and think pretty much. And if you may notice in some of his writing, he's talking about sitting next to the fire or looking at a piece of wax. And so he's maybe a little lazy, but maybe just loves to think and likes to be comfortable when he thinks. Ultimately, he died. He was working as a tutor for some rich people's kids, and he was sort of living in a place where he had to get up early and walk through the snow to work. Uh, Cold and died. Uh, yeah, interesting character in his biography. But the important part is his epistemology. So he begins his meditations by pointing out that many of the things he thought he knew turned out to be wrong. Uh, we've all experienced this. I was in my 30s when I realized that the plural of octopus was not octopi, right? It turns out it's octopuses. My whole life, even when someone told me, I was like, no, you must be wrong, right? And then I looked it up. You know, just a small example, right? But I'm sure you can think of examples where you spend a long time thinking, one thing, and then finally figured out, oh my gosh, I was wrong about that the whole time. Um, more generally, like in the history of science, we can see all sorts of examples of this. So scientists once thought that heat was a sort of a substance that flowed from hot things into cold things. They called it caloric. Uh, Turns out that heat is basically vibrating molecules, right? So have you ever been wrong about anything? Think about it, right? And that's where Descartes was. He says, look, there's definitely some things like I've been totally wrong about. So how can I be so sure that the things I think I know now, I'm not wrong about these, right? Because, if I was wrong about, I was absolutely certain about, or I thought I was. Turns out I was wrong. So how do I know for sure that anything I believe is actually true, is actually knowledge? Because all the stuff I think I know right now, I acquired in the same way as I acquired the stuff that turned out to be mistaken, right? I kind of pick it up haphazardly from teachers, books, TV, friends, Descartes wants to do better than this just sort of haphazard um, accumulation of various beliefs, some of which may be true, some of which may not. He wants to come up with a rigorous method uh, that can guarantee us knowledge. So his approach to what we call epistemology or the theory of knowledge is called foundationalism. Uh, the idea being he wants a firm foundation, right, for all his knowledge. So, I mean, how would we do that, right? How would we get there? Well, one thing you could do is examine each thing you think you know one by one, right, and be like, okay, every word that I think I know the plural of. Turns out I was wrong about octopus. So what about foxes? Is fox? Should I check that, right? Should I check every single word? Um, and that would literally take forever because I literally have an infinite number of beliefs, right? For example, I have all these beliefs that I'm not even like explicitly aware I have until I think about it, right? So like turns out I believe or I think I know that the best way to drink from a cup is to use the handle, right? But I also have another belief that when the cup doesn't have a handle, there's another better way to do it, right? Um, and so on. I have all this implicit knowledge, this sort of know-how about how I get through my life. There's also just like, given the way logic works, if I think I know that grass is green, then I also know that grass is green or the sky is blue. I can keep adding disjunctions. They may or may not be true, but the overall sentence will turn out to be true. This is just a rule of logic, right? Any or statement only needs one half of it to be true. Um, I know that my chair is less than 1 foot or less than 3 feet tall. I know my chair is less than 4 feet tall, less than 5 feet tall, and so on, right? So the number of beliefs I have is literally infinite. And so that method is not going to work, examining each belief one by one, right, to see if it's true. Um, so instead of doing that, Descartes decides, look, I'm going to wipe the slate clean. I'm going to doubt everything. For all I know, every single belief I have might be false, right? And let's try to build it up from scratch. And this is the foundation. Build it up from find a secure foundation, right? Something that can't be false, and then see where we can get from there. So how do we get our knowledge? Well, Descartes notes that a lot of what we think we know comes from the senses, right? So he knows he's sitting in a chair. He knows, I know I'm wearing a black shirt. I know that there's a laptop in front of me. How do I know all this? Well, I see it, right? It's just I get information in through my eyes. So is that all we need, right? Do we just need to sort of like use the senses? Or could my senses be wrong? Well, yeah, it turns out, yeah, your senses can be wrong, right? It's possible I'm hallucinating right now. It's possible I'm dreaming right now. It's possible I'm in the Matrix, right? And I'm hooked up to a pod and there's no computer and there's no chair, right? And I'm just lying in a pod if you've old movie by now, right? But we've all had dreams, right, where we thought it was so real until we woke up and realized, oh, none of that happened, right? So all this sensory information, we can't really know for sure, like 100% without a doubt that we're not dreaming at any moment, right? Because lots of times when we were dreaming, we were convinced that it was real. So maybe the senses, maybe we can't rely on the senses, right? He says, okay, well, maybe not. But what about this? Even if it turns out I'm dreaming right now, and all these images, right, of chairs and computers aren't actually real, but the fact that I have images of computers and chairs, like that imagery must have come from something, right? I didn't just make it up out of whole cloth, did I? Um, like, could I dream? Could I have hands in a dream if I'd never actually seen hands, right? Did that just come from nowhere? Um, so maybe we could say, like, even if, my sensory experience right now, we don't know if it's real. We know that, like, the content sort of corresponds to something real in the world, right? If I can dream about hands, then hands must exist, and that would be some knowledge, right? Um, but then Descartes says, well, hold on, let's see if we can doubt that, right? He says, well, yeah, I don't know, right? Maybe I don't have hands, right? So, for example, painters paint stuff that doesn't exist, unicorns, right? And what they do is they just take a horse, they take a horn, and they slap them together, and now you've created some content that doesn't even actually exist. So, I don't know, how do I know that hands exist? Maybe in reality, I only have one finger, right? And in my dream, I sort of imagined that I had five of them all together and called them a hand or something like that. Um, okay, fair point, Descartes. But even so, okay, I must like have a finger, right? If a painter is going to put together a horn and a horse to make a unicorn, the horse must exist, right? And the horn must exist, right? So at least some parts of something must exist, even if I combine them in my what I think is my experience, but is actually a dream, right? In sort of like um, original ways, right? Novel ways. Um, so, like for example, right? Maybe I can be sure, even if I don't know that like I have hands, right? Maybe I can be sure that there are basic like geometrical truths, right? That there are certain shapes, and yeah, maybe in my dream I'm putting together these shapes into novel objects. There's not really any hands in the world, but at least maybe I can know that like the truths of geometry are true, and there are shapes, right? Because how else could I put them together to dream a hand, right? Um, and I think that's wrong about calculus. Actually, that was Leibniz, but he did do Cartesian geometry, right? So, the Cartesian plane, x and y coordinates, all that's Descartes. He invented that. Um, so maybe geometry and math, right? Like maybe math will be true. 2 plus 3 equals 5, like no matter what, whether I'm dreaming or not, right? Um, maybe that's something I could know, right? Because that doesn't actually come from the senses, or so you could argue, right? Math is some sort of pure reasoning, right? Um, So maybe that's something I can do. Maybe that's my foundation, right? Mathematics and geometry. Then Descartes says, well, hold on. Let's see if we can doubt it, right? He says, you know what? This is a little crazy, right? But suppose, imagine this scenario, right? There's some evil demon out there who's decided to make it his life's work to trick me. So every time, right, I think about like 2 plus 2 equals 4, he gets in there, makes me make a mistake, right? And so I think that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true, but it turns out it's false, right? And he's tricking me every single time, right? Um, okay, I mean, it seems outlandish, but again, what Descartes is looking for is 100% certainty, right? So he wants like total certainty. He wants even like the crazy scenario of evil demons, right? He doesn't even want that to be able to undermine his knowledge, right? And it doesn't seem like he's found that, right? So even mathematics, maybe I could be mistaken, right, about geometry and mathematics, because maybe there's some supernatural being tricking me and making me make mistakes about it. And when we get to the end of meditation one, that's where we are, just total radical skepticism. He's like, I don't know if I can know anything. For all I know, every single one of my beliefs is false. Even my beliefs about mathematics, my beliefs about whether I have hands, right? Who knows? I might be dreaming. A demon might be tricking me every single moment. And some people actually stop there, right? There are radical skeptics out there. Um, but so far, he hasn't come up with anything. So he goes to sleep, takes a break, and comes back, meditation two. So meditation two, Descartes finds his foundation finally. He finds something he cannot doubt. This thing is not a religious thing, right? It's not that God exists, and it's not that it doesn't come from the Bible, right? He's not assuming anything about the Bible or God is actually true, right? Um, back to his evil demon, right? Maybe I'm being tricked by some supernatural being, so I don't even know anything, right? But he does. But he says, "Hey, But even if I'm being tricked, right, even if I'm being deceived, and even if I'm sitting here doubting, right, whether I could know about math, at the very least, I know I exist, right? And here's this quote. He says, I am, I exist is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it, right? So for me to say I exist entails that I exist, right? And even if I'm dreaming and I'm not, my mouth isn't even moving, I'm thinking it, right? And if I'm thinking I exist, I have to exist in order to think I exist. So my existence, right? If I'm able to doubt or able to be deceived or able to think I exist, then that's going to be necessarily true, right? One way to think about this is to say it's necessarily true because to deny it would be a contradiction, right? To say, if I sit here and say, I don't exist, I've just contradicted myself because I have to exist to say or think I don't exist, right? And this is his famous quote, cogito ergo sum, right? Which is, I think, therefore I am. He never actually says that in the meditations, right? But that's the quote, the famous quote that's attributed to Descartes. And that's the essence of what he's trying to say, right? If I'm thinking, then I exist. Okay, so we have it. We have some knowledge, right? Even if an evil demon is tricking me, in order to be tricked, I have to exist. So we found something. We have our foundation, and there's no way that that could be false, right? So that's my foundation. Can I start building back up now, right? Um, is there anything I know about myself, right? Can I prove that I have hands? Uh, well, not yet, right? We don't quite have sensory knowledge back yet. So Descartes starts to think about um, what he used to think he was before he started doubting everything. And if you'd had asked him before he started his meditations, hey, Descartes, what are you? He would have said, oh, I'm a kind of man. I'm a man, right? Well, what's a man? Well, Aristotle defines man as a reasonable animal. Of course, women would be included. They definitely all were sexist, but when they said man, they meant to include humanity, right? Um, but okay, if we define man as reasonable animal, now we have to define what reasonable is and what animal is, and see if we actually know what all our beliefs about what reasonability is and what being an animal is. Um, so now that would send us back into our old loop of like checking every single belief that we have, right? So when I'm trying to figure out what I am, again, I can't just fall back on my old beliefs that were so doubtful in the first place. But we need to start back again from our foundation. I know I'm thinking, so can I say anything about what sort of thing I am? Thought I had a body. That knowledge came from my senses. That might be mistaken, right? The demon could be tricking me about that. But if I'm being tricked, I'm thinking, right? Being deceived is a kind of thinking. Doubting is a kind of thinking. Um, and he calls the thinking part of him a soul, right? Um, he's not adding anything extra about that as far as like any religious connotations or anything. This is just his name for this thinking thing, right? And he says, well, I know I've got that, right? Whatever it is about me that thinks, I know I think, and so I have a thinking faculty. We'll call that a soul, right? So at the very least, I know I'm this type of thing. I'm the type of thing that doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, just a whole list of kinds of thinking that you can do, right? Okay, so we've got our foundation, right? I'm thinking, and we're starting to build back up. What kind of thing am I? Well, I'm a thinking thing, right? Um, and we'll call that a soul. So it's notice that this method, this kind of epistemology, turns our traditional methods of knowledge sort of on their head. We used to think that the things we could be most certain of are just the things right in front of us. Like, what could be more sure than the fact that I have a hand in front of me with 5 fingers? Um, for Descartes, the most certain things are kind of the most abstract, right? That I exist, that I'm a soul, right? Um, so he is what we call a rationalist, right? As opposed to a empiricist. So the empiricist, and those will be like Locke and Berkeley and Hume, who are sort of the generation after Descartes, they believe in sensory information. They say senses are the foundation of all our knowledge. Descartes is a rationalist, along with Kant, who will come later. And he says, no, the most certain things we know are mental things. Um, so now he knows that we're going to be resistant to this, right? All of us are kind of empiricists by nature, right? We just naturally trust our senses and doubt more abstract knowledge. And Descartes, being a rationalist, he's going to try to convince us that actually we're mistaken and the most abstract things are actually the most certain and the most real. So he uses the example of a piece of wax. So he says, take this piece of wax. He says you can see its shape, you can see its color, you can smell it, right? Feel its texture, taste its sweetness, all the sensory, this wax impinges on our senses in every way. But he says, now take this piece of wax and bring it close to the fire. So again, Descartes likes to be warm and snuggly. You imagine him sitting in his room next to the fire, thinking, right, staying warm. So he takes his wax close to the fire. He says, all those properties of the wax just changed, right? The shape is different now. The color has gotten darker. The texture has changed. It even smells different, tastes different. So everything about this wax that I thought I knew about through the senses is gone, right? It's all changed. So what's left of the wax, right? Every physical property of it has changed. He says all that's left is my idea of the wax, right? So if I know anything about this wax, it's in virtue of my idea, right? That's the only thing that remains, right? The only thing that persists through all the physical changes, right? So Descartes thinks that this is true not just of wax, but of every physical body, right? He says everything we know about physics and the world of bodies and stuff, strictly speaking, we don't know it from the senses, right? Because all that changes constantly. We only know it rationally. Okay, so where are we? By the end of meditation 2, right? And we'll stop here for this class. If we were going to do a philosophy class, we maybe keep going. If you're interested in this stuff, I'd love to talk about it. Uh, by the end of meditation 2, we know some stuff. We know, one, I exist, right? We know this I is a thinking thing, and we have a list of things that are cases of thinking, doubting, judging, willing, and so on. That's not quite a proper definition. It's just kind of a list of examples of thinking. But we know some stuff, right? We don't know a lot of stuff, right? He's got a lot more work to do to build up the list of things we know, to get back to where we can believe we have hands. But what we do know now is totally unshakable, right? I can't possibly be mistaken about the fact that I'm a thinking thing, right? So that's good. It's progress, and it's a brand new type of progress. It's not based on faith. It's not based on religion. It's not based on, the authority of the king or whatever. This is any one of you can do this little experiment on your own, right? It's insofar as you're a rational being, you are just as much of an authority on knowledge as anybody else. Right? So this is kind of a radical approach to knowledge and to epistemology. Now, there are some objections to this argument, right? I find it convincing. I think if philosophy has made any progress, this is progress. I can prove I exist, right? But some people will quibble about like some of the moves, right? So, Descartes says, think. He says, okay, I'm doubting, and so I'm doubting must mean I'm thinking, right? But it's not clear where the I comes from, right? So if there's deception going on or thinking going on, right, that's something exists. But does that mean that there's an entire subject here, right? It's something we could call I, or is that just some sort of accident of grammar where we have to sort of attach a subject to every verb like that? It's not clear, right? If I don't know if it's interesting to you, we can push on it. We can talk about it in the discussion, right? So I don't know. I find Descartes' argument convincing, and even if you don't totally find it convincing, at the very least, his approach to knowledge is sort of radical and new and democratic. Right? Any reasonable person can investigate this stuff for themselves, and they don't necessarily have to be beholden to the authority of, again, religion or the king or things like that. So next we'll talk about Locke and Wollstonecraft, who start to talk about individual rights, that each person, right, whether they're a peasant or a king, just in virtue of being human, has certain basic rights that can be violated. And this also is a brand new idea, right? And also is a sort of democratizing influence. All right, I'll see you next time.